Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. It's Terry, your host. So we are at the global corporate headquarters of the world's largest temperature controlled truck company, Prime Inc., here in Springfield, Missouri. So we were, Paul and I were actually going to go out to Wilson's Creek Battlefield, which is near Springfield. I think it's closer to like Republic, Missouri. But we decided not to because the weather's kind of iffy. I think it's a little bit above freezing. It's been snowing for a few hours, and so the grass is all covered with snow, but the roads are just wet. We did go over to Walmart and ran that errand and getting laundry done. I'm gonna watch the Bills game later. Watch the Bills lay waste to the evil New England Patriots. And apparently it's gonna be like super cold, not snowy, but super cold in Buffalo today. So it's gonna be one of the coldest playoff games ever. So if the weather does what it's predicted to do. But there was a comedian, I think it was Milton Berle, who used to say he knew a good joke when he stole one. And if imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, then I'm going to flatter somebody that's a friend of mine. So the other day on his channel, No Hippie Trucking and Transportation, Lyle talked about, somebody asked him, what are things you don't like about Prime? And, I'm kind of with him in that I think there's a lot to like at Prime, but it's a trucking company and it's a big company. And so you get sometimes just the vagaries of dealing with a bureaucracy. And, it's like any big organization, right? But I think Prime does a really good job at, keeping its drivers happy and keeping the wheels turning. And I met a driver last night. So I mentioned I had to get oil change and I had to get an air filter. So I went into here in Prime they have like a speed lane. It's not really that fast because changing oil on a truck is not like running into Jiffy Lube. But it was fun in that I pulled up in line and there were some people outside, and so I got to talk to some other truckers, meet some other truckers, so that was fun. And one of the guys has been with Prime like forever, like I think he said 27 years, and I'm like, man, he must be, he must like it. And he worked for Schneider before that, so for quite a while. I think he's been driving a truck for a long time. And so it was fun to meet. It's fun to meet people and pick their brain, listen to their experiences and stuff. But so, and there is one of the things I like about Prime too is there's camaraderie here. A lot of companies you don't really get to see very many people, and it's just fun to like meet people or meet up with people that or you've met over your time with the company. Even though it's a really big company, I think there is some camaraderie at Prime. So I wanted to go over all of the things that Lyle said he didn't like, and he admitted that it was kind of a stretch for him. But I'm going to have a little bit different take on some of these, and one of the reasons is that I've been with other trucking companies. I've been with other companies that are mega carriers. I've been with a carrier that was kind of middle of the road, and then I've been with a carrier that was small when I first got there but is continuing to grow. And so I bring a different experience, not necessarily a better experience, but just different. And so my perspective on things at Prime is somewhat different than Lyle's, because Lyle, even though he's super knowledgeable and he's got a lot of great info, he's only been at one trucking company and it's Prime, so he's primed. And so I just want to do this as an exercise to just, share some insights that I've learned at other companies about the things that he said were negatives. And again, he admitted that he's got a stretch for things. So the first thing he talked about was the Qualcomm /OmniTrax. And I got to tell you, man, I'm totally down with what he's saying. This thing is like twice in a row when I've started my truck, it's like booting up, what does it say? Like, I don't know what it exactly says, but it's like it's booting up. And then it goes into shutdown mode and then goes back into reboot, and it takes, I would say, 8 to 9 minutes for you to be actually able to do anything with it. But here's where I disagree with Lyle about the Qualcomm. He's right that this is ancient technology. This is like the Pong of, ELD. But he blames it on Qualcomm or OmniTrax, whoever it is, right? I mean, but he's kind of wrong about that, and I'll tell you why. The problem with this system is not the system itself, it's the fact that huge companies like Prime put up with this crap. Like, it's not a big enough deal to Prime that we as drivers hate this system. It's not a big enough deal. Now, I worked at a company that's very, very tech forward. And I'm not saying Prime is in the dark ages regarding tech like J&R Schugel was or is, but GP Transco is very tech savvy. They have a lot of really forward thinking folks and a lot of people that are just wired, or whatever you want to call it. And so while I didn't necessarily love it, the system, they use Samsara, which is all based on tablets or on your phone. So like I could, there's no boot up or it doesn't take anything to do it. It's really easy to edit your logs. I'm not suggesting that Prime should move to Samsara, but it was a better system just because it is not so archaic. It is not so slow. It's easier to work with. It's not as frustrating. And, so yeah, I totally agree that Qualcomm just needs to go the way of the Ginsu knife or dinosaurs or whatever. But I don't put it on Qualcomm. Qualcomm sells a substandard product, but trucking companies keep buying it. So why would they improve it? And the answer is because they don't look at us as their customers. They look at us maybe as end users, but they don't care what we think as truck drivers because we're not paying for the system. It's got to be a company initiative. And a company like Prime that says, you know what, our drivers hate this system and we don't see the utility in continuing to have a system that drivers hate. But until Prime is willing to listen to that, Qualcomm's here to stay. Number 2 was the inbound and outbound lanes. So here's my take on that. Again, I worked for other companies, and while it is true, because when I came back from Walmart a little bit ago, inbound was filled up. I mean, there were probably like, 5 trucks outside waiting, 5, with trailers obviously, and 3 bays that were filled up, and I went through the bobtail lane. But in the grand scheme of things, I really do think that the time you wait at inbound and at outbound sometimes is worth it. And here's the reason. Those guys are really good, like Lyle said. And yeah, it might add a little time to your trip. But let's be candid. if you pull into Prime, one of the yards, and there's a big line at outbound, and you're just sitting there, you can go off duty, right? You don't have to stay on the drive line, certainly, and you don't even have to stay on duty. You just sit there, and then you putt into the garage, and then you putt to a parking spot. Lots of people do that. Let's be candid about it, right? We're not logging that as on duty time, a lot of us. And and I know when I pull in, if there's a line, I just pull my brakes. If I got to go to the bathroom, I go in there. If I got to get a soda, I go in there. If I'm going to be dropping the trailer, if I'm in Springfield, I take the bills in. I already have dealt with driver lineup, so it's not a big deal. The other thing that I like about it is, even though I'm used to fueling a truck and fueling a reefer and stuff like that, if I don't want to deal with that, like in weather like today, if I don't want to be sitting at a pump at some truck stop and I'm going to a terminal, I could just be like, hey, they'll do the work. All I got to do, it's like, when your parent in the 60s, when your parents pulled up to a gas station, hand the credit card, or probably back then cash, but just give them your ID and tell them what you want done, right? There are people that will service that, and you still get Prime points. So I kind of like it, and I like the fact that somebody's a second set of eyes, and if I got an issue, and I think every time I've had an issue that I noticed on the road, when I pull in, I'm like, hey, that right rear tire on the trailer looks crappy, and invariably they'll change it. So it's peace of mind for me, especially if I'm keeping that trailer. One time I had an engine bushing, or a bushing broken on my leaf spring that I didn't notice, but apparently that's an issue with the Freightliners. And so one of the guys in Pittston was like, hey man, there's a bushing, and he showed me, it's like way under there, by the way. It was on the back of the leaf spring. He's like, hey, there's this bushing broken. He shines the light on it. I mean, honestly, I missed it. And so I like that, and it's worth it to me to deal with the delays. The other thing is, there's a scale when you pull out. You come in, maybe somebody T-called a trailer, a load, and you pick it up. It's nice to have a scale right there. I don't have to wonder if, because every truck's different. So some people might want to have the tandems in a different place. I can, adjust it the way I want, pull up on the scale, get confirmation of what I'm dealing with, make sure I'm not overweight, or if I'm really close, make sure that I don't completely fill up my fuel tanks, maybe only get a quarter at a time until I get this really heavy load off my back. So that's what I like about inbound and outbound. But I think even Lyle would, he mentioned that they're really good at what they do. And let me add this, because I was talking to Paul about this. I worked at some companies that had horrible shops. I worked at two places actually that had, I think, pretty crappy shops. One was at Knight Transportation. Now, Knight is a big company, and they have a ton of terminals. We'll get to the terminal issue in a minute. But a lot of their shops are horrible, and they're slow. They're not open 24 hours a day. They're not open on weekends. And they're so bad, even at getting a tire change, because they don't have outbound and inbound like Prime does, that I know drivers who would hook a trailer with a flat tire on it and drive off of Knight's yard and go down the road 5 miles and say they had a flat and call road service because it was quicker. So I've been at companies that have horrible shops. I needed an airline changed. I was hooked up to a trailer and I blew an airline in at the yard. It took 6 hours to get that changed, and I reached out to the head of maintenance when I was there, and that was at the Charlotte terminal. But I was based in a terminal in Carlisle, PA, that also the shop had a horrible reputation. No one in the company wanted to get any work done there, and it really is a great benefit to drivers. You don't understand it if you haven't driven for a long time, or you haven't had to deal with a shop disaster where, you know, a shop is like I said, they work bankers hours at night, and it's great to have 24-hour shops. Even at GP Transco, which is a small company, the shops were open till midnight during the week, and they were open on Saturday mornings. So even for a small company with only one terminal, they had much better shop hours than some companies, and they were very responsive. Very responsive, and I like that. And even the littlest things, like when my truck's in the shop, I can walk out to it and go in it, or I can get out of it and go to the bathroom. There are companies that won't let you do that. I mean, when I was at night, they would sometimes they would freak out if you just walked in the garage door instead of through the, you know, pedestrian door. And I like that at Prime, we can go in there, talk directly to the mechanics. We don't have to deal with the office manager solely. We can tell them what we're seeing. And, you know, for the most part, I haven't had any mechanics that weren't helpful, friendly, you know, wanted to do a good job, you know, to get the truck on the road. So I don't know what it is that Prime's doing with mechanics as far as compensation and stuff, but it seems like there's a lot less turnover, and they're a lot more responsive to the driver's needs. And, you know, because I had a tire that needed to be changed one time at my own home terminal, and it was like 5 minutes after 5, and I remember calling Road Assist. I'm at my terminal. I had to call Road Assist, or breakdown they called it. And the guy's like, why don't you just take it in there? It's only 3:05. Well, he was out in mountain time, so I'm like, no, it's after 5. He's like, oh yeah, I guess you'll have to drive it over to TA. So what I do, I literally drive down the street like a quarter mile to the TA. That's a huge benefit here at Prime. And, you know, I'm talking about tires. Heck, you don't even have to go in the shop. Just go to Outbound, get a tire change. Hold times on the phone system. You know, I hate it when I'm on hold. I especially hate it when there's a good song playing and I gotta listen to that, whatever the message of the day is, twice. But I do enjoy hearing the messages, because a lot of times, like I never watch the safety meeting on Fridays, but I do like on Mondays, if I call in, I can hear Steve Field talking about, basically reviewing what they talked about. So you know, there's always some good information that comes on that. I just don't like having to hear it twice, which tells you you're on hold for a while. But the problem here is this. I think it's hard to gauge how much phone interaction people at the headquarters or at terminals are going to have with drivers. There might be some nights where those night dispatchers or the people that are handling live loaded calls are just buried, and then there might be other nights where, you know, they pick up on the first ring. And I think it's just a crapshoot. But I understand why the company doesn't add people, because candidly, from a business perspective, are you going to just add people to sit around? I mean, yeah, they would help with the call volume when it's really busy. But then when it's not busy, you're paying a lot of people to just sit around hoping a truck driver calls and needs something. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. I mean, honestly, what I do sometimes with the live loaded calls is, if it's the middle of the night and sometimes I get hung up on. Like, I frequently get hung up on because I think there's a glitch in the system. But what I'll do is I'll call, and if I get hung up on twice, after the third time when they don't answer, I just get on the road, because I've already sent my departure call electronically. And then I just wait until I have a chance to call them back later on. I mean, I'll drive for an hour or whatever, and if I stop, I'll ring them up again and see. And, you know, I mean, I know that's not what they want, but that's just how I deal with it. So number 4 was more terminals. So Lyle is totally correct, I think, when he says that Prime has the best terminals. They have the most amenities. They just have a lot for everybody. They're more like military bases than they are terminals. Because I feel like Prime is, if you were ever in the military, you can kind of see it, especially in Springfield. It's like there's long chow lines, and there's lots of people. The boot camps, right, all dressed the same, right? They got the same very clean safety vests. They all, like you could just tell them they're carrying the little green pouches with their paperwork in it and their gouge sheets or whatever. And so it's kind of like boot camp, right? You can tell the new people. There's long lines for chow. There's workout facilities. There's, the Navy Exchange or the BX, the Prime store. So yeah, it's kind of like a military operation. And really, and that's a credit to Mr. Lowe, because the military does a lot of things well. And adopting that for this kind of environment is good. And you got your drill instructors who are out there on the pad with the recruits, and so it's cool. The Prime is building that 4th terminal in Minooka. It's a purpose-built terminal. I mean, because I think it's really a big part of the expansion of the tanker division. The thing is, though, that terminals for Prime to build terminals, they got to be utilized. Now, I will say this. I worked at Knight Transportation. Knight has a lot of terminals. But Knight also sublet space at terminals to other companies. Prime does not do that. Prime, however, does use drop yards where other companies are in and out and stuff like that. And, drop yards are never great places. I mean, even the best of them is not great. And so, I've been to the drop yard in Dallas a couple of times. I've been to the drop yard in Atlanta. Those are the only ones I've been to. But, I take it back. I have been to the one in, there's one in Fontana, California. So I was in there one night too. They're a little confusing, but they're useful. I don't know that Prime necessarily needs another terminal somewhere, and I don't even know where I would suggest they put it. We run a lot in California. Maybe there should be a terminal on the 99 or off the 5 in the Central Valley. Maybe that's a good location. Maybe, I don't know, the Atlanta, Georgia area. I mean, lots of companies have terminals there. It's pretty centrally located. But maybe down in Texas. I don't know. But I don't, I will say when I was at Knight, I mean, a lot of trips I could just go terminal to terminal to terminal. It is great for parking. But, Prime's terminals are significantly more full service than terminals at other companies. But maybe that's a good thing. I don't have a strong opinion either way. I mean, I think the one in Minooka is in a great location. By the way, it's right down the road from GP Transco's terminal. It's right down the road from a Knight terminal. So it's definitely a good location. And then number 5 is slow-ass trucks, as Lyle would say. So I've driven for companies that 3 of the companies I've driven for were governed at 65. But I can tell you that being governed at 65 is not the biggest issue that drivers have. It's just that at Prime, it's kind of the only issue. And I'll tell you why. At Knight, I was governed at 65. But the fleet maximum speed was 68. So that meant even if you were on a long hill where you could run it up, like, because at prime, you know, if you run it up to 74, 73, whatever, no one's going to say anything. But at night, you would get a safety violation. And night has this system where if you are too close to a vehicle, if you don't put the brakes on within 2 seconds, you get points against your safety score. And the higher your safety score is, the worse driver you are, basically. And there are all sorts of things. Like if you were coming up behind somebody and then you wanted to change lanes and get behind another car that was going faster, if you came up and you changed lanes, and when you did, you ended up less than 2 seconds behind the vehicle that was going by the slower traffic, that would be an unsafe lane change because you ended up less than 2 seconds behind. That was I mean, I hated that system. I just hated it, and it was constantly alarming. And then when I was at J&R Schugel has mandatory inward-facing cameras, but they also have a system that picks up speed limit signs. The problem is that it doesn't know the difference between a speed limit sign and a minimum speed sign. And it doesn't know the difference between a sign on the road you're on and a service road or an off-ramp. It was a pain in the butt, and it would constantly alarm, and then you would have like some critical safety event showing up on your Qualcomm that you would have to get rid of. It was a pain in the butt system. At GP Transco, we were able to drive 67 on cruise, and then we had what is called Pass Smart, which is a feature on the Freightliners. I mean, I don't know if it's on other trucks, where we could go up to 70 miles an hour for, you know, an aggregate of 15 minutes. And we would typically get, in a typical regular drive shift, you'd get 2 15-minute periods where you could accelerate to 70. Now, truth of the matter is, the way I used the Pass Smart is, when I knew I had it, I would just go up to 70 if I was out on the road. And I just drive 70 for 15 minutes. It really didn't make me get any place very much faster. I mean, I did the math in my head one time, and it's like, you know, it's like 3 miles an hour for a quarter of an hour. So it's like 0.75 miles farther or something, right? It's negligible. But it was fun to go 70 for a little while and pass people. But honestly, Prime does not have a lot of the safety gadgets, if you will, that other companies do that are also very irksome. So the fact that these are governed at 65, and that's the only thing that they really have other than what's with the truck itself, like what comes from the factory, I'm not really worried about that. And you know, for what it's worth, because I have driven for a company that you could go 67 on the regular and 70 for periods of time, I can tell you that no matter how fast you're going, somebody is going to be going faster. I mean, I'm not joking. I guarantee I could be driving a truck like 86 miles an hour in some places, and some other semi will come flying by me. I mean, that's just how it is. If you have an ego about that, Prime's probably not your company. But then again, almost no company is. You better go independent. The other thing that I would say is that, you know, I know people think that they're going to make, you know, you could get an extra trip or two a year because you drive a little bit faster, but that's assuming a lot of things. That's assuming that you don't get held up at a shipper, or that there's even a load available that you want to take. And so I just don't buy that narrative. I mean, it would be really tough, I think, to show that, oh, if you let me drive 67, I'll be able to take an extra load in a year. Because I just don't think that, you know, just because something is, you know, just because something happens, that it necessarily means that's the reason. I mean, you know, like the saying goes, correlation isn't causation. And so you might run faster this year than last, and you might get an extra load. But then again, you might run the same speed and get 2 extra loads, because there's so many variables that go into it. And I really think that one of the least, predictive variables is going to be speed, because we've all done it, right? Like, I'll be driving along 65, or maybe if I have a lot of time, I'll be driving 60, and some guy passes me 4 or 5 times in the same day on the same highway. And guess what? We're at the same truck stop that night. And sometimes I even get there before him. Why? Because he stopped 4 times. That's why he passed me 4 times. And I just kept going. I drove my 8 or 5.5, whatever, took a half an hour, and then got back on the road. And I don't, I'm not hitting truck stops in every state. And, there's a way to be efficient and still run 65. I think a lot of drivers waste a lot of time. I mean, I've been at places where people got there before me and were basically doing the same thing I was doing, a drop and hook. And it doesn't matter if they're from Prime or other companies. And I'm gone before them. I got there after them, and I'm gone before them. Why? Because I hustle a little bit, and I'm focused, and I get the stuff done. Maybe it's just a little bit of experience, but there's a lot of inefficient drivers out there, and saying as a fleet with thousands of trucks, oh, let's bump up the speed to 68 because we got inefficient drivers. I mean, Crete bumped their speed up to 68. I still get advertisements from them all the time. Does that make them a better trucking company? I don't think so. I mean, you either want to work for Crete or not. But if the speed is the thing that motivates you to work for a company, then you're going to be unhappy the minute that you have a safety violation. They say, oh yeah, but we're cutting you back to 64. Because that's not uncommon. There are a lot of these carriers that run faster than Prime, but they also have really draconian policies about if you make a mistake, they cut your speed. There's a guy that that I follow on YouTube. He hasn't put out a lot of videos lately, but he worked for Millis, and he made a mistake because his trailer tires were locked up. They were, the brakes were frozen. He made a mistake, and they cut his speed. It's by the way, it's Russian Trucking is the channel. It's Mark, and they cut his speed significantly. And he kind of did calculate that he probably lost loads because of that, but being that they let him run, I think at 68, and then they cut him to 62 or something, that's probably true, because that was a significant cut. So the grass isn't always greener on the other side, and if you go to a company because they drive faster, I'm not really sure that's a win. If that's the only reason you're worried about, picking a company is because of how fast they drive, that's probably not a good criteria. So anyway, thanks to Lyle for doing his list originally. I appreciate everybody tuning in and watching this video to the end. If you did, please subscribe, like, comment, share, and we'll come back with you next time. Bye.